People like you should only eat things like this.
The man in seat 2A had barely removed his headphones when a sharp female voice cut through the first-class cabin. "Sir, I need you to leave this seat immediately." Ethan Brooks looked up slowly. Standing over him was Vanessa Collins, the senior flight attendant. Her posture was stiff, one hand pressed against her tablet, the other rested tightly against her waist, like she was already preparing for resistance. Behind her, conversation stopped. A silver-haired businessman lowered his champagne glass halfway to the table. A woman in pearls paused in the middle of scrolling her phone. Even the soft jazz floating through the cabin suddenly felt distant. Nobody spoke, but everyone was watching. Ethan sat calmly beneath the warm amber lights of the cabin. Black t-shirt, dark jeans, white sneakers worn at the edges. Nothing about him matched the image most people associated with first-class luxury. No designer logo, no expensive watch, no performance. And that was exactly why Vanessa had walked over. Outside the aircraft windows, rain slid across the glass in long silver streaks. Chicago's runway lights blurred against the stormy evening sky, while the aircraft hummed softly beneath the passengers' feet. Inside cabin, the air smelled like leather, coffee, and expensive perfume. Ethan looked down briefly at the boarding pass resting beside his hand, then back at Vanessa. "I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." His voice was calm, low, controlled. Vanessa forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "This seat is reserved for our premium passengers, sir." The wording was careful, but the meaning was clear. Ethan picked up the boarding pass and placed it gently onto the folded tray table between them. Seat 2A, first class, paid in full. Vanessa stared at the ticket for a second longer than necessary, not because she was checking the information, because she was checking him. People like Vanessa never admitted prejudice out loud. Not anymore. In modern America, discrimination had learned how to dress itself in professionalism. It lived in tone, in hesitation, in suspicion disguised as policy. And Ethan knew that look well. He had seen it in luxury hotels, boardrooms, country clubs, even hospitals when doctors assumed he was there for delivery instead of ownership. A man near the aisle cleared his throat awkwardly. Vanessa finally picked up the boarding pass between two fingers like evidence from a crime scene. "Where did you purchase this ticket, sir?" A small silence spread through the cabin. Ethan noticed two passengers exchange a glance. Not shock, recognition. Everyone understood what was happening now. Online, people call moments like this microaggressions, but there was nothing micro about public humiliation. Ethan leaned back slowly in his seat. Directly through the aisle, a young flight attendant named Rachel stood frozen beside the beverage cart. Her eyes moved nervously between Ethan and Vanessa. She already knew Vanessa was wrong, but fear inside corporate systems had a soundless language of its own. "Stay quiet, protect the uniform, protect the company," Ethan answered calmly. "I bought it through your airline's website 3 weeks ago." Vanessa nodded slowly, though suspicion still lingered in her face. "Interesting." She glanced toward the front galley where another crew member stood watching. Then she lowered her voice. "Sir, we've had situations before with fraudulent upgrades." The businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Rachel looked down at the floor. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not anger, exhaustion. Because successful black men in America learned early that humiliation rarely arrives screaming. Most of the time, it arrives smiling politely while questioning whether you belonged in the room, or in this case, in the seat. Still, Ethan did not raise his voice, did not argue, did not perform outrage for the audience around him. Because he understood something most people never learned. The moment a black man loses emotional control in public, people stop hearing his words and start fearing his tone, and Vanessa knew that too. That was why she kept pushing. "Sir, I'm going to need another form of identification." Her voice became louder this time, official, sharp, public. A few phones slowly appeared between seats, passengers pretending not to record. But recording anyway. Ethan noticed all of it. The nervous breathing, the shifting eyes, the quiet tension spreading row by row through first class. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above the runway. Inside, the real storm had already begun, and not one person in that cabin realized the quiet man in seat 2A was not just another passenger. He was the founder of Nexatech, the same company Aurora Air was desperately negotiating with to save their collapsing customer service systems before the next fiscal quarter buried the airline in losses. Vanessa Collins had no idea she was staring down the most important business partner her company had ever needed. And in less than 1 hour, every person on that aircraft would understand exactly how dangerous it is to mistake dignity for weakness. Rachel's hand tightened around the handle of the beverage cart, but she did not move. She was 26, knew enough to still believe rules were supposed to protect people, not corner them. Her training manual had been clear: verify quietly, respect the passenger, avoid public embarrassment unless safety was involved. Nothing about Ethan Brooks looked unsafe. He sat still in seat 2A, shoulders relaxed, palms open on the armrests. His breathing stayed even. His eyes did not dart. His voice had not risen once. But Vanessa Collins stood over him like she had found a criminal. "Sir," identification, she repeated. This time she held out her hand. The cabin watched the hand before they watched Ethan. That was how public pressure worked. It created a stage, then waited to see who would break first. Ethan reached inside his jacket slowly. Rachel saw him make the movement careful. Too careful. It hurt her because she understood why. A white passenger could reach for a wallet without thinking. Ethan had to make sure every person in that cabin knew he was reaching for nothing dangerous. He removed his driver's license and placed it beside the boarding pass. Vanessa picked it up. Her eyes flicked over the name, Ethan Brooks. She froze for half a breath. The name meant something to her, but not enough. Not yet. She had heard it in a corporate briefing weeks earlier, maybe. Something about a tech vendor. Something about an executive visit. But her mind pushed it away because it did not match the man in front of her. People often ignored facts when facts embarrassed their assumptions. Vanessa handed the license back. "Thank you," she said, but her tone had changed from suspicion to irritation. Now she had documents. Now she had proof, and somehow that made her angrier. A man in seat 1C leaned toward the aisle. His name was Richard Coleman, 58, retired bank executive, the kind of man who believed politeness meant silence from everyone except himself. He cleared his throat. "Is this going to delay us?" Vanessa turned toward him with immediate warmth. "No, Mr. Coleman. I apologize for the disturbance." The word disturbance landed on Ethan's chest. Rachel looked at him. For the first time, she saw something move across his face. Not rage, not shame. Something quieter, wariness. He had been here before. Maybe not on this plane. Maybe not with this crew. But in some hotel lobby, some restaurant, some boardroom, some expensive room where people smiled while asking him to prove he had the right to breathe the same air. Vanessa tucked her tablet against her side. "We will need to confirm this with the gate," she said. Ethan looked at her. "You already scanned my pass when I boarded." That was correct. Rachel remembered the green light. She had been standing near the galley when Ethan entered. The system accepted him. Seat 2A, first class. No alert, no issue. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Sir, please do not tell me how to do my job." The cabin grew still again. A woman across the aisle, Margaret Lewis, 64, lowered her book. She had gray hair pulled into a soft bun and hands that trembled slightly from arthritis. She looked at Ethan, then at Vanessa, then at Rachel. "Young lady," Margaret said quietly, "his pass looks valid. Why is this necessary?" Vanessa turned toward her with a professional smile. "Mom, we appreciate your concern, but we are following airline procedure." Margaret did not look convinced. Procedure should not feel like punishment. That sentence moved through the cabin like a cold draft. Rachel felt it in her stomach. Vanessa heard it too. Her cheeks flushed. Ethan turned his head slightly toward Margaret. "Thank you, Mom," he said. His voice was low, not dramatic, just human. That made the moment worse for Vanessa, because cruelty thrives when its target becomes an idea, a problem passenger, a suspected fraud, a disruption. But Ethan had just become a person again in front of everyone. Vanessa stepped closer. Sir, I am going to ask you to remain seated while I speak with the purser. Ethan gave a small nod. I have been seated the entire time. A phone camera rose from row 3, then another. Not high, not obvious, just enough. Rachel saw the tiny red recording light on one screen. Her heart began to pound. Aurora Air trained its crew to fear viral incidents more than bad behavior. That was the ugly truth. Employees could survive a complaint. They could explain away a tone. They could hide behind policy. But video had a way of stripping excuses down to the bone. Vanessa walked toward the front galley, heels tapping hard against the carpet. Rachel followed, pushing the cart a few inches before stopping. In the galley, Vanessa leaned close to the purser, Mark Ellis. He was 45, neat, square-jawed, with silver at his temples and a talent for sounding calm while doing nothing useful. He listened as Vanessa whispered. Rachel could not hear every word. Fraudulent upgrade, uncooperative, making passengers uncomfortable. None of those words were true. Mark glanced towards seat 2A. Then he looked at Rachel. You saw him board? Rachel swallowed. Yes. Any issue at the scanner? No. Mark lowered his voice. Did Vanessa ask for your input? Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. That was the warning. Not direct, not written, but clear enough. Stay in your place. She looked past him toward Ethan. He sat alone under the amber lights, watched by strangers, holding himself together with a dignity that seemed almost painful. Rachel thought of her father. He had been a bus driver in Atlanta for 30 years, a gentleman, a careful man. Once, at a hotel in Savannah, a clerk had asked him 3 times if he was sure he could afford the room. Rachel had been 12. She still remembered how he smiled through it. Not because it did not hurt, because he did not want his daughter to see him wounded. That memory rose in her now, sharp and alive. Mark straightened his jacket. All right, he said. I'll handle it. Vanessa looked relieved. Rachel did not. Mark walked down the aisle with Vanessa just behind him. Their shadows stretched across Ethan's tray table. Mr. Brooks, Mark said, voice smooth. We seem to have a concern regarding your seat assignment. Ethan looked up. There is no concern. There is only my seat assignment. Mark blinked. Several passengers shifted. Richard Coleman muttered, unbelievable. Mark kept the smile. For the comfort of all passengers, we may need to reseat you temporarily while we resolve this. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Temporarily where? Mark hesitated. There are available seats in the main cabin. The words hit harder than a shout. Main cabin. Not another first-class seat. Not a quiet verification. A downgrade. A removal dressed as service. Margaret Lewis sat upright. That is disgraceful, she said. Richard snapped his head toward her. Mom, please. Some of us have connections. Margaret looked at him with tired eyes. And some of us still have a conscience. The cabin inhaled as one body. Ethan did not move. Outside, rain beat harder against the windows. The aircraft lights flickered once as ground power shifted. The sound filled the silence. Mark leaned in. Sir, refusing crew instructions can become a serious matter. There it was, the threat. Soft voice, polished words, heavy consequences. Ethan slowly placed both hands on the armrests. I want everyone to hear me clearly, he said. His voice did not rise. That made people listen harder. I have shown my boarding pass. I have shown my identification. I have answered every question. I have not threatened anyone. I have not raised my voice. I have not left my seat. Vanessa folded her arms. Sir, this tone is exactly what concerns us. Ethan looked at her then. For the first time, his calm turned cold. What tone? No one moved. Ethan repeated it. What tone, Miss Collins? Vanessa's lips parted. She had no answer that would not reveal the truth. Rachel felt her pulse in her throat. Mark looked toward the cockpit, then toward the passengers filming, then back at Ethan. Sir, I think it would be best if the captain came out. Ethan nodded once. Please call whoever you need. His phone buzzed on the tray table. The screen lit up for only a second. Rachel saw the name before it faded. Aurora Airborne Liaison. Her breath caught. Ethan turned the phone face down without answering. That small motion changed everything. He was not panicking. He was waiting. and Rachel, standing frozen in the aisle, suddenly understood the worst part. Vanessa had not found a man trying to sneak into first class. She had found a mirror, and the whole company was about to be forced to look into it. Captain Thomas Grant came out of the cockpit with the kind of careful walk pilots use when they already know every eye is on them. He was 53, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, with a pressed uniform and a face trained to show control. He had flown through thunderstorms over Denver, medical emergencies over Phoenix, and mechanical warnings over the Atlantic. He knew how to calm people, but this was different. This was not weather. This was human. The first-class cabin had gone silent before he reached row 2. Phones were still raised, but lower now, tucked near armrests, hidden behind magazines, resting against champagne glasses. Nobody wanted to look involved. Everyone wanted proof. Vanessa stood beside Mark Ellis with her tablet held against her chest. "Captain," she said quickly, "this passenger has been difficult since boarding." Ethan Brooks looked at her. He had not moved. That made her sound worse. Captain Grant looked at Ethan, then at the boarding pass on the tray table, then at the license beside it. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I understand there is some confusion." Ethan's eyes stayed steady. "There is no confusion, Captain. I am in my assigned seat." Grant nodded, but not fully. His gaze moved over Ethan's clothes, his shoes, the worn edge of his leather bag now stored above him. The look lasted less than a second, but Ethan saw it. Rachel saw it too. So did Margaret Lewis. Captain Grant picked up the boarding pass. "Seat 2A, first class. Confirmed." He looked at the license. Same name, same face. "No issue." For a brief moment, truth had the room. Then Richard Coleman cleared his throat from seat 1C. "Captain, with respect, some of us have been sitting here for nearly half an hour waiting for this to be resolved. I have a connection in Dallas. This is becoming absurd." His voice carried the practiced irritation of a man used to being answered. Grant glanced toward him. "I understand, sir." Margaret turned her head. "No, Captain. You understand him because he complains loudly. You have not understood the man being accused." A soft rustle moved through the cabin. Vanessa's face tightened. "Mom," she said, "please remain seated and let the crew handle this." Margaret's hands shook as she folded them over her book. "I am seated. I am also watching." That landed harder than shouting. Captain Grant inhaled slowly through his nose. He had a schedule, a crew, a cabin full of witnesses, and a situation already slipping away from him. His training told him to restore order. His pride told him to support his crew. His conscience, faint but present, told him something was wrong. He chose order. "Mr. Brooks," he said, lowering his voice, "I would like you to step into the jet bridge for a few minutes while we verify everything privately." Ethan stared at him. "Privately?" "Yes, sir." Ethan looked around the cabin. "After your crew questioned me publicly, threatened to move me to the main cabin publicly, and suggested I might be using a fraudulent upgrade publicly, now you want privacy?" The words were quiet. They cut clean. Rachel looked down. Her face burned with shame, though she had not spoken against him. Sometimes silence had its own weight. She felt it pressing against her ribs. Captain Grant kept his jaw firm. "Sir, refusing a captain's instruction can create a safety concern." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What safety concern have I created?" The captain did not answer fast enough. Ethan continued. "Have I touched anyone?" "No." "Have I raised my voice?" "No." "Have I blocked the aisle?" "No." "Have I refused to show documentation?"
No.
Each word narrowed the room. Richard muttered something under his breath. Vanessa shifted onto her feet. Mark looked toward the galley as if an answer might be hiding there. Ethan turned back to Captain Grant. "So I will ask again, what safety concern have I created?" The cabin held its breath. Grant's face hardened, not because Ethan was wrong, because Ethan was right in front of witnesses. "Sir, the crew has reported feeling uncomfortable." Ethan sat back. There it was, uncomfortable. The most dangerous word in the room. Not unsafe, not threatened, uncomfortable. Margaret closed her eyes. Rachel felt something inside her break a little because she knew that word. People used it when they wanted power without evidence. They used it when dignity made them uneasy. They used it when someone refused to shrink. Ethan's voice slowed. Captain, discomfort is not danger. The sentence moved through the cabin and stayed there. Even Richard went quiet. For 1 second, nobody knew what to do with the truth. Then Vanessa spoke. He's being argumentative. Ethan looked at her. No, I am being precise. Rachel almost smiled, but fear stopped her. Captain Grant's radio crackled at his belt. A gate agent's voice came through, low and urgent. Captain Grant, operations is asking for an update. We are showing a departure hold. Grant pressed the radio. Passenger matter in first class. Stand by. Another pause. Then the gate agent came back. Copy. Also, corporate communications has flagged a possible live stream from your cabin. Grant's eyes moved sharply across the seats. Phones dipped. Too late. Everyone knew now. The story had already left the aircraft. Vanessa's confidence flickered for the first time. Her hand moved to her hair, then stopped. She looked toward Rachel, and Rachel saw fear there. Not regret. Fear. That difference mattered. Mark stepped closer to the captain and whispered, but the cabin was too quiet to hide it. We need him off before this gets worse. Ethan heard it. So did Margaret. So did the young woman in row 3, holding her phone at chest level. Captain Grant made his decision. Mr. Brooks, I am asking you one final time to step off the aircraft voluntarily. Ethan did not blink, and if I decline, then we will request airport security. The words hung there, heavy, official, ugly. Rachel's stomach twisted. She saw Ethan's hands on the armrests. Still open, still calm. She thought again of her father at the hotel counter, smiling through humiliation because he had a child beside him. She wondered how many people had learned to survive by swallowing pain in public. Ethan looked at Captain Grant for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Vanessa snapped. Sir, do not start recording. Ethan did not look at her. I am not recording. He tapped the screen once and placed the call on speaker. A woman answered after one ring. Mr. Brooks? The voice was sharp, professional, and unmistakably awake. Olivia, Ethan said, I need you to document a service escalation aboard Aurora Air Flight 487 at O'Hare, first class. Seat 2A. Captain Grant's eyes narrowed. Sir, who are you calling? Ethan lifted his gaze. My general counsel. The cabin shifted, not loudly, but enough. Olivia's voice came through again. Understood. Legal is on the line. Board liaison is present. Do you want compliance notified? Vanessa went still. Mark's mouth opened slightly. Captain Grant's hand lowered from his radio. Ethan looked at each of them one by one. Not yet. Olivia paused. Are you safe? That question changed the air. Not are they delayed, not are they embarrassed. Are you safe? For the first time that evening, Ethan's expression softened. Yes, he said. I am safe. I am just being reminded why this work matters. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. She turned away before Vanessa could see. Captain Grant's radio crackled again, sharper this time. Captain Grant, this is Aurora operations. We need you to contact corporate immediately. Priority call. Repeat, priority call. Grant's face drained slowly. Vanessa whispered, Captain, but he did not answer her. The cockpit phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound cut through the cabin like an alarm. Ethan ended his call and placed the phone face down. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply looked at Captain Grant and said very quietly, I think you should answer that. No one moved. The rain kept striking the windows. The jazz still played somewhere overhead. And inside that first-class cabin, every person understood the same thing at the same time. The quiet man in seat 2A had never been powerless. They had only mistaken his restraint for permission. Captain Grant lifted the cockpit phone with a hand that no longer looked steady. Yes, this is Grant. He turned slightly away from the cabin, but there was nowhere to hide on an aircraft. First class had become a courtroom with leather seats. Every breath was evidence. Every silence had weight. The voice on the other end was not loud. It did not need to be. Grant listened. His face changed in small stages. Confusion first, then disbelief. Then something close to fear. Vanessa watched him from 2 steps away, waiting for support that was no longer coming. Mark Ellis stood beside her with his tablet pressed flat against his stomach. Rachel remained near the galley, frozen between training and conscience. Ethan Brooks sat in seat 2A, calm as rain against glass. Captain Grant swallowed. I understand, he said into the phone. Yes, I understand who he is. The cabin shifted. A whisper moved from row 3 to row 4. Who is he? Vanessa heard it. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan. For the first time, she really looked at him. Not at the shirt, not at the shoes, not at the quiet bag above his head. At him, the man. Grant lowered the phone slowly. The receiver clicked into place with a sound that seemed far too small for the damage already done. Mr. Brooks, he said. His voice had lost its command. Ethan looked up. Yes, Captain. Grant took one step closer, then stopped. He looked like a man trying to cross a bridge that had already burned behind him. I have been informed that you are the founder and chief executive officer of Nexatech. A sharp breath cut through the cabin. Richard Coleman sat back as if the seat had moved under him. Margaret Lewis closed her eyes for a moment, not in shock, but in sorrow. She had lived long enough to know that some people only learned respect after power introduced itself. Vanessa's lips parted. Nexatech. The name finally reached her in full. The vendor meeting, the emergency upgrade plan, the board presentation, the customer service system Aurora Air needed before the next audit, before the next quarter, before more complaints turned into lawsuits. Ethan Brooks was not just a passenger. He was the man Aurora Air had been trying to impress for months, and they had chosen to introduce themselves by humiliating him. Mark Ellis leaned toward the captain. Captain, I think we should move this discussion off the aircraft. Ethan turned his head. No, one word, flat, clean. Mark stopped breathing for half a second. Ethan continued, still seated. This discussion began here, in front of these people. It will not suddenly become private because the facts have become inconvenient. The words struck Vanessa hardest. She looked down at the tablet in her hands. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She had written notes there. Disruptive. Questionable upgrade. Refused to cooperate. Now each phrase looked like a stain. Captain Grant removed his hat slowly. Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. Ethan did not accept it immediately. That made the room tighten. Grant held the hat against his chest. I should have reviewed the facts before asking you to leave your seat. I relied too heavily on crew reports. That was a failure of judgment. Vanessa looked at him sharply, wounded by his honesty. Captain, I reported what I observed. Rachel finally moved. It was small, just one step forward. But everyone saw it. Her voice shook, yet she spoke. No, you did not. Vanessa turned. Excuse me? Rachel's hands trembled at her sides. She looked younger than before, but also stronger. You saw a man in his assigned seat, she said. You saw a valid scan. You saw a valid boarding pass. You saw identification. And you kept looking for a problem after the problem was gone. The cabin went silent. Vanessa's face hardened. Rachel, you need to be very careful. Rachel nodded slowly. I know. Her voice cracked. I have been careful my whole life. That sentence was not loud, but it traveled. She looked at Ethan, then at Margaret, then at the floor. My father used to tell me that keeping a job should never cost you your soul. I forgot that tonight. Ethan's expression softened. He did not rescue her from the moment. He let her own it. That was a kind of respect, too. Vanessa's eyes filled, not with remorse, but with panic. Mark stepped in quickly. Captain, we should de-escalate. Offer Mr. Brooks compensation, a travel credit, a formal apology. Margaret gave a bitter little laugh. A travel credit? She looked around the cabin, her voice thin but sharp. That is what companies offer when luggage is delayed, not when dignity is taken. Richard Coleman shifted in his seat. With all respect, this has gone far enough. We all make mistakes. The man turned out to be important. Fine. Can we go now? Ethan looked at him. Turned out to be important. Richard blinked. Ethan leaned forward slightly. That is exactly the problem, Mr.
Coleman.
Richard's face tightened at the use of his name. Ethan's voice stayed calm. I should not have needed to be important to be treated with basic respect. My boarding pass should have been enough. My identification should have been enough. My calm should have been enough. My humanity should have been enough. No one answered. Because there was no answer that could stand upright. Outside, the rain had softened, but the windows still carried trails of water, like the aircraft itself had been weeping quietly. Captain Grant looked at Vanessa. Miss Collins, step into the galley. Vanessa stared at him. Captain, now. The word snapped. She moved past Ethan without looking at him. Her shoulder brushed the aisle seat. Her perfume lingered after her like a false apology. Mark followed, but Grant held up one hand. Not you. Stay here. Mark froze. Grant turned back to Ethan. Mr. Brooks, I am placing Miss Collins off active duty for this flight pending review. I will also be filing a full incident report with operations and compliance. Ethan watched him carefully. And Mr. Ellis? Mark's face went pale. Grant's jaw tightened. Mr. Ellis will also be included in that report. Included is not the same as accountable, Ethan said. The captain nodded once. He had no defense left. You are right. Those 3 words changed the cabin more than any title had. You are right. Simple, human, late, but still necessary. Rachel wiped one tear with the back of her hand, embarrassed by it. Margaret reached across the aisle and touched her wrist. Sometimes telling the truth costs something, dear, Margaret said softly, but silence costs more. Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Ethan looked at the young attendant. Thank you, Rachel. She looked startled that he knew her name. You read my name tag, she whispered. Ethan almost smiled. People deserve to be seen. For a moment, the cabin breathed again, not easily, but honestly. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. This time he answered. Olivia, he said. Her voice came through, controlled but urgent. The board chair from Aurora is requesting to speak with you now. Corporate Communications is monitoring multiple live streams. Legal wants direction. Ethan looked at Captain Grant, at Mark, at Rachel, at Margaret, at the faces turned toward him. Tell them this, he said. He paused. The partnership is on hold. Mark closed his eyes. Grant looked down. Vanessa, hidden in the galley, made a small sound that might have been a sob or a curse. Ethan continued, not canceled, on hold. Because I want to see what Aurora Air does when the cameras are still running and when the passenger is no longer anonymous. Olivia was quiet. Then she said, understood. Ethan ended the call. The aircraft seemed smaller now. Every passenger in first class understood that the delay was no longer about departure time. It was about a company being measured in real time. Ethan looked toward the rain-streaked window. His reflection stared back at him, tired, steady, still seated. Then he turned to the captain. I will remain on this flight, he said. In the seat I paid for. I expect no special treatment. I expect professional treatment. Captain Grant nodded. Yes, sir. Ethan held his gaze. Not because I am Ethan Brooks. Another pause. Because I am a passenger. The lesson landed without music, without applause, without speeches. Just truth. And for the first time that evening, nobody in first class looked away. The aircraft did not move for another 20 minutes. No one complained now, not even Richard Coleman. The delay had changed shape. It no longer felt like an inconvenience. It felt like a reckoning, sitting quietly between the leather seats and the closed cabin door. Captain Grant returned to the cockpit after speaking with operations. His shoulders looked heavier. The kind of weight that did not come from flying through bad weather, but from realizing he had become part of something larger than one flight. Vanessa remained in the forward galley, out of sight, but her presence still lingered in the cabin. It was in the awkward silence, in the stiff posture of the crew, in the way passengers avoided meeting Ethan's eyes, as if they had been caught watching something they should have stopped. Rachel stood near the aisle with a tray of water glasses. Her hands were steadier now, but her face was still pale. She approached Ethan slowly. Mr. Brooks, she said. Ethan looked up. Would you like some water? The question was simple, ordinary, almost painfully so. Ethan nodded. Thank you, Rachel. She placed the glass on his tray table with both hands, careful not to rush. Then she glanced toward the galley, lowered her voice, and said something she had not been trained to say. I'm sorry I waited so long. Ethan held her gaze. You spoke when it mattered. Rachel shook her head. It mattered before that. The words stayed between them. They were not dramatic, they were true. And sometimes truth was heavier than drama. Across the aisle, Margaret Lewis watched Rachel with quiet pride. She had seen enough years to know courage rarely arrived fully formed. It usually came trembling. It came late. It came with fear in his throat. But when it came to him, it still mattered. The intercom clicked. Captain Grant's voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are coordinating with operations and expect to depart shortly. I also want to acknowledge that a service issue occurred during boarding. It is being documented and reviewed. He paused. His next words came slower. Every passenger on this aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity. The cabin remained silent. No applause, no murmurs, just listening. That was enough. Ethan looked out the window. The rain had softened to mist. Ground crews moved below in reflective vests, guiding carts under white floodlights. Everything outside still worked because people trusted signals, procedures, and roles. Green meant go. Red meant stop. A raised hand meant wait. Inside the aircraft, the rules had been less clear, not because they were unwritten, but because people had chosen when to apply them. That was what disturbed Ethan most. Not Vanessa alone. Systems love to blame one person, one bad employee, one misunderstanding, one unfortunate incident. But Ethan knew better. Bad behavior survived because someone looked away from it. Then someone excused it. Then someone promoted it. Then someone trained others to copy it without ever saying the ugly part out loud. Mark Ellis walked back into the cabin. He had removed his service jacket. His tie sat slightly crooked. He looked smaller now, no longer protected by the clean lines of authority. Mr. Brooks, he said quietly, may I speak with you? Ethan turned from the window. Here is fine, Mark swallowed. Yes, of course. He stood in the aisle, aware of every phone, every ear, every witness. I failed to handle this properly, Mark said. I should have reviewed the documents myself. I should not have repeated concerns without evidence, and I should not have suggested moving you to the main cabin. His voice shook on the last words. Ethan studied him. Why did you? Mark blinked. Sir, why did you suggest moving me? Mark looked down. Because it seemed like the fastest way to calm the situation. Ethan nodded once. Calm for whom? Mark did not answer. Ethan's voice remained controlled. That is the question every company should ask before it calls something a solution. Who gets protected? Who gets burdened? Who is asked to be smaller so everyone else can feel comfortable? Margaret lowered her eyes. Rachel pressed her lips together. Richard Coleman stared at his hands. Mark's face reddened. I understand, he said. Ethan shook his head. And not yet, but maybe you can. That was not cruelty. It was an opening, a narrow one. Mark seemed to understand that. He nodded and stepped back. From the galley came a sharp whisper. Then Vanessa appeared. Her makeup had shifted slightly under her eyes. She had clearly cried, though nobody knew if it was from shame, fear, anger, or all three tangled together. Captain Grant followed behind her. Ms. Collins has asked to speak, he said. Ethan did not respond immediately. Vanessa stopped beside row 2. She did not stand over him this time. She stood back, hands folded in front of her. Mr. Brooks, she began. Her voice broke. I am sorry for how I treated you. The cabin waited. Ethan watched her carefully. Vanessa continued. I made assumptions. I questioned you when your documents were valid. I escalated the situation when I should have corrected myself. And I embarrassed you in front of this cabin. Her breathing grew uneven. I was wrong. For the first time, those words sounded less like damage control and more like impact reaching the person who caused it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I accept that you said it. Vanessa flinched slightly. But forgiveness is not the same as accountability, Ethan continued. An apology is not the same as repair. She nodded, tears bright in her eyes. I understand. Ethan's voice softened, but did not weaken. I hope you do. Because the next person you misjudge may not have a title that scares your company. They may not have lawyers. They may not have witnesses. They may simply carry the wound home and wonder why being calm still was not enough. Vanessa covered her mouth with one hand. Rachel turned away, crying silently now. Even Richard looked shaken, because that was the part people rarely wanted to face. The harm did not begin when power was revealed. The harm began when dignity was denied. Captain Grant stood in the aisle like a man listening to a verdict. Mr. Brooks, he said, Corporate has asked whether you would prefer to deplane and take a later flight. Ethan looked around the cabin. At Margaret, who had spoken when silence would have been easier. At Rachel, who had found her voice before the door closed. At Mark, who was learning the difference between peace and justice too late, but perhaps not too late forever. Then Ethan looked at the empty space where Vanessa had stood over him. "No," he said. Everyone waited. "I will stay." His voice was quiet. "Leaving would make this look like my shame. It is not." No one breathed. Ethan picked up his glass of water. "I am going to Los Angeles. I am going in the seat I paid for, and I am going as myself." The words settled deep. Captain Grant nodded. "Yes, sir." A few minutes later, the engines began to hum louder. The cabin lights dimmed. Rain streaks trembled across the windows as the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate. Ethan leaned against the headrest and closed his eyes. He was tired, not defeated. Just tired in the way good people become tired when they have to prove their humanity in rooms that should have welcomed them. Across the aisle, Margaret whispered, loud enough for him to hear, "You handled that with grace." Ethan opened his eyes. "No, Mom," he said softly. "I handled it with practice." Margaret's face fell. Then she nodded, understanding the sadness inside that answer. The plane rolled toward the runway. Behind him at the gate, the video was already spreading. Ahead of them, in Los Angeles, Aurora Air's board was preparing for an emergency meeting, and in Seat 2A, Ethan Brooks sat still, carrying not revenge, but purpose. Because this was no longer about a flight. It was about every person ever asked to prove they belonged in a place they had already earned. The plane climbed through the last layer of storm clouds, and for a few minutes, everything looked peaceful. Below them, Chicago disappeared beneath a blanket of gray. Above them, the sky opened into a dark blue calm that almost felt unfair. The aircraft leveled out. The seatbelt sign stayed on. The engine settled into a steady roar. But inside first class, the silence had not softened. It had changed. Before, people had been watching Ethan Brooks like a problem. Now they watched him like a man carrying something they did not fully understand. He sat by the window, hands folded loosely in his lap, face turned toward the glass. His reflection floated over the clouds, calm, tired, alone. Rachel moved through the aisle with the beverage cart. She offered water first. No champagne, no bright performance, just service, careful and quiet. When she reached Richard Coleman, he did not look up. "Sparkling water," he muttered. Rachel poured it. Her hand shook just enough for the bubbles to spill over the rim. Richard noticed. His old instinct rose, the one that wanted to correct, to complain, to make someone smaller because his own discomfort needed somewhere to go. Then he looked past her at Ethan, and for once he stopped himself. "Thank you," he said. Rachel blinked. "You're welcome, sir." It was a small thing, almost nothing, but small things had built the harm that filled this cabin. Maybe small things could begin undoing it too. Across the aisle, Margaret Lewis adjusted the thin blanket over her knees. She had not slept. She had not even tried. Her eyes kept moving to Ethan with the expression of someone remembering old wounds through another person's pain. She waited until Rachel moved away. Then she leaned slightly toward him. "Mr. Brooks." Ethan turned. "Yes, Mom, I owe you something." He frowned gently. "You spoke up. You do not owe me anything." Margaret shook her head. "No, I spoke late." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her book. "Years ago, my husband and I owned a small pharmacy in Ohio. Good place. Good people mostly. One afternoon, a young black mother came in with her little boy. He must have been 7, maybe 8. She was looking for cough medicine. My cashier followed them through every aisle. Ethan listened. No interruption, no rescue, just presence. Margaret swallowed. I saw it. I knew what it was. But I told myself I was busy. I told myself the cashier meant well. I told myself there was no need to make a scene. Her voice grew thinner. The little boy noticed. Children always notice. He looked at his mother and asked if they had done something wrong. Ethan's face changed. Not much.
Enough.
Margaret blinked back tears. I still hear that child's voice sometimes. Tonight, when Vanessa stood over you, I heard him again. The engines hummed around them. Somewhere behind the curtain, a baby cried once, then quieted. Ethan said softly, "You cannot change that day." "No," Margaret whispered, "but you can change what you do when the next day comes." She looked at him then, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Ethan turned back toward the window. "My mother used to say people are not healed by shame. They are healed by truth, followed by action." Margaret nodded slowly. "That sounds like a wise woman." She was.
Was?
Ethan's eyes stayed on the clouds. "She passed 3 years ago. Cancer." Margaret's hand moved to her chest. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded once. "She cleaned offices at night when I was a kid. Corporate buildings downtown. She used to take me with her when childcare fell through. I would sit in conference rooms after midnight, doing homework under those big glass walls. Sometimes I would look at the names on the doors and wonder what kind of people got to sit in rooms like that during the day." He paused. "Years later, I bought one of those companies." Margaret smiled through tears. "Your mother must have been proud." "She was proud before that," Ethan said. "That was her gift. She never waited for the world to confirm my worth before she believed in it." The words settled between them like a prayer. Near the galley, Vanessa heard part of it. She was seated on the jump seat, arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the floor. Captain Grant had removed her from service, but there was nowhere else for her to go until landing. So she sat there with her own choices. At first, she had been angry at Ethan, at Rachel, at the passengers filming, at the company for calling so fast. But anger had started to burn out. What remained was harder. Memory. Her father had been a police sergeant in Pennsylvania, strict, proud, a man who believed authority was proof of character. As a girl, Vanessa had learned to respect uniforms before people. The uniform spoke first, the person came second. That belief had helped her build a career. Tonight, it had helped her wound a man who had done nothing wrong. She pressed her hands together until her knuckles whitened. Mark Ellis stood in the galley beside her, scrolling through messages on his tablet. His face looked gray under the cabin light. "It's everywhere," he whispered. Vanessa looked up. "What is?" He turned the screen slightly. A video, then another, a headline from a local station. "Passenger questioned in first class despite valid ticket. Aurora Air executive partner involved." Vanessa's lips trembled. "They're naming me?" "Not yet," Mark said. "Yet." The word landed hard. Vanessa looked toward the cabin. "I apologized." Mark did not answer, because both of them knew the truth. Apology might touch the person. It did not erase the record. It did not undo the training failures. It did not repair the culture that had taught them to trust suspicion over evidence. In seat 2A, Ethan's phone lit again. "Olivia," he answered quietly. "Yes." Her voice came through his earpiece, but Rachel, passing nearby, saw his expression sharpen. "Ethan, the board chair is offering to meet you at the gate in Los Angeles. They are preparing a statement. They want to say the matter was a misunderstanding." Ethan closed his eyes.
No.
Olivia paused. "No statement, no misunderstanding." He opened his eyes. A misunderstanding is when two people have the same facts and reach different conclusions. This was not that. They had the facts. They rejected them. Rachel stopped at the galley curtain, holding an empty tray. Ethan continued, "Tell them not to protect the brand at the expense of the truth. That is how companies rot from the inside." "Understood," Olivia said. "What do you want instead?" Ethan looked down the aisle, at Rachel, at Margaret, at Richard sitting stiffly with his untouched water, at Vanessa, visible in the shadows of the galley. "A full review," he said. "Not just this crew. Complaints from the last 5 years. Seat removals, upgrade disputes, passenger verification incidents. Break it down by race, gender, age, disability, and cabin class." Olivia exhaled. "That will be ugly." Ethan's voice hardened. "Then it has been ugly already." Rachel lowered her eyes. Captain Grant stepped out of the cockpit again, just in time to hear the last line. He stood still, as if the sentence had met him at the door. Ethan ended the call. The captain walked to row 2. "Mr. Brooks." Ethan looked up. "I need to tell you something." The cabin grew attentive again. Grant held the back of the aisle seat. "I reviewed the cabin report Vanessa started before departure. The language was biased, not openly, not the kind people admit, but biased all the same. Questionable passenger, Possible upgrade abuse. Agitated tone. He took a breath. None of that matched what I saw when I came out. Ethan said nothing. Grant continued. I signed onto her version because it was easier than challenging it under pressure. His voice lowered. That is on me. For the first time, Ethan stood. Slowly. Not threatening. Not triumphant. Just upright. The cabin seemed to shrink around him. Captain, he said, authority is not proven by how quickly it controls someone. It is proven by how carefully it protects the truth when control would be easier. Grant looked wounded by the words, but he did not look away.
Yes, sir.
Ethan shook his head. Not, sir. Just hear it. Grant nodded. I hear it. Behind them, Vanessa began to cry quietly. No one comforted her yet, not because she did not deserve humanity, but because the room was finally learning that discomfort is not the same as harm. The aircraft flew west through the night. Outside, the sky was calm. Inside, the storm had moved where it belonged, into the conscience of everyone who had mistaken silence for peace. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for the long stretch west, nobody in first class was pretending this was only about one flight anymore. The engines held their deep, steady sound, a low thunder under the floor, the kind of sound that usually made passengers sleepy. But sleep did not come easily that night. Ethan Brooks sat in seat 2A with his laptop open, not because he wanted to work, but because stillness gave people too much room to stare. Lines of documents glowed on the screen. Internal notes, contract drafts, a risk assessment from Nexatech. Every few minutes, a message came in from Olivia. Legal updates, media updates, board updates. The story was spreading faster than the aircraft. Passenger questioned, despite valid first-class ticket. Aurora Air partner involved in cabin incident. Video shows black executive challenged repeatedly before takeoff. The words were clean. Too clean. Headlines always were. They could not show the tightness in a man's chest when a room decided he did not belong. They could not capture the split second when people looked at him and waited to see if he would become the threat they had already imagined. Rachel approached with a small plate covered by a linen napkin. Mr. Brooks, she said softly. Ethan looked up. Captain Grant asked me to offer you dinner service now. I know it is late. I also know so this should have been done properly from the beginning. She placed the plate down, not with pity, with care. That mattered. Ethan lifted the napkin, grilled salmon, rice, vegetables, warm bread. A regular first-class meal. Nothing extraordinary, nothing special. That was what made it painful. This was all he had asked for. Ordinary respect. Thank you, Rachel. She nodded, then hesitated.
May I ask you something?
Ethan closed his laptop halfway.
You may.
Rachel glanced toward the galley. Vanessa sat hidden behind the curtain, still off duty, still crying. In short, quiet breaths, she tried to swallow. Rachel lowered her voice. How do you stay so calm? Ethan did not answer at once. He looked at the food, then at his hands. I do not always feel calm. Rachel waited. I learned to move calmly because the world punishes some people for showing pain, especially black men. If I yell, I become dangerous. If I cry, I become weak. If I defend myself too strongly, I become difficult. So I learned to control the outside while the inside takes the hit. Rachel's eyes filled again, but this time she did not look away. That is not fair. No, Ethan said. It is not. His voice softened. But fairness is not born by itself. People build it, choice by choice, moment by moment. Sometimes in courtrooms, sometimes in boardrooms, sometimes in the aisle of an airplane when one person decides not to stay quiet. Rachel understood what he was giving her, not absolution, responsibility. She nodded. I will give a statement when we land. Ethan looked at her. Only tell the truth. Do not exaggerate. Do not protect me. Do not protect them. Just tell the truth. Rachel gave a small, broken smile. That sounds harder than picking a side. It is. Across the aisle, Richard Coleman had been listening. He tried not to. He had turned his body toward the window, but guilt had a way of pulling words through walls. For most of his life, Richard had considered himself a decent man. He gave to the church. He paid his taxes. He held doors for women. He tipped well when service was good. In his own mind, prejudice belonged to cruel people in history books, not retired bankers in first class. But when Vanessa questioned Ethan, Richard had not wondered whether she was wrong. He had wondered whether Ethan was delaying him. That truth sat bitter on his tongue. He pressed the call button, then immediately regretted it. Rachel turned. Yes, sir? Richard looked at Ethan, then back at her. Could you bring me a coffee, please? Of course. His voice caught before she turned away. And Rachel? She paused. I was rude earlier. Rachel stood still. Richard swallowed. To you. To Mr. Brooks.
To Mrs. Lewis.
To the whole situation, really. He cleared his throat, embarrassed by the weakness in his own voice. I kept thinking about my connection, my meeting, my schedule, as if those things mattered more than what was happening right in front of me. Rachel did not rush to comfort him. Good apologies needed room to stand on their own. Richard turned toward Ethan. Mr. Brooks. Ethan looked at him. I said you turned out to be important. That was wrong. His face flushed. You were important before I knew your name. The cabin was quiet enough to hear the ice settle in a glass. Ethan studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. Thank you for saying that. Richard let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Margaret Lewis watched from across the aisle, her expression gentle but unsparing. That is a start, Mr. Coleman, she said. Richard gave a faint, tired laugh. At my age, I suppose starts are better late than never. Margaret leaned back, only if they continue after landing. That ended the laugh, because she was right. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime, but nobody moved much. The aircraft felt suspended not only in the sky, but in consequence. Near the cockpit, Captain Grant reviewed the preliminary incident notes on his tablet. Each line made his stomach tighten. Passenger concern reported by senior attendant. Passenger question regarding eligibility. Passenger asked to step off aircraft. Words like that were designed to protect institutions. They sanded down harm until it looked procedural. Grant deleted nothing. But beneath the report, he began adding his own statement. Initial crew assessment was not supported by available documentation. Passenger remained calm throughout. Escalation occurred despite valid boarding pass and identification. Bias may have influenced perception of passenger behavior. He stopped after typing the word bias. His thumb hovered over the screen. That word could follow him for the rest of his career. It could turn a personnel review into a legal inquiry. It could end friendships. It could make crew members say he had betrayed them. But he had already betrayed someone tonight. The only question left was whether he would keep doing it. He pressed save. In the galley, Vanessa saw him do it. Her face tightened. Captain, she whispered, if you write it that way, they will destroy me. Grant looked at her. He was tired now, deeply tired. Vanessa, I am not writing it to destroy you.
Then why?
Because if we soften what happened, we will do it again. She stared at him as if he had slapped her. I am not a racist person. Grant's voice stayed low. Maybe not in the way you imagine. But tonight, you treated suspicion as evidence because of how a man looked. You need to sit with that before you defend yourself from it. Vanessa shook her head. Tears slid down her cheeks. I have worked this job for 15 years. And tonight, Grant said, the job showed you something about yourself. She covered her face. For the first time, her crying changed. It was no longer fear of losing status. It was the sound of a person beginning to see the harm clearly enough that excuses no longer fit. Ethan heard none of that directly, but he felt the cabin change again. Less defensive now, more awake. The flight continued into darkness. The clouds below looked like a pale ocean beneath the moon. Somewhere over the plains, most of the economy cabin slept. People who knew nothing about the storm in first class leaned against windows, held hands, adjusted blankets, trusted the crew to carry them safely through the night. That trust was sacred. Ethan knew it. Captain Grant knew it now, too. Near midnight, Olivia called again. Ethan answered. The board has agreed to your requested review, she said. Independent counsel. Full passenger complaint audit. Public statement will avoid the word misunderstanding. Ethan closed his eyes. Good. They want to know whether Nexatech is walking away. He looked around the cabin one more time. Rachel writing notes on a service pad. Margaret resting with her eyes closed. Richard staring silently into his coffee. Captain Grant standing in the galley, no longer hiding from the truth. Vanessa broken, but perhaps not beyond repair. Not yet, Ethan said. Olivia waited. A company is not judged only by the harm it allows. It is judged by what it is willing to change after the harm is exposed. He looked out at the dark sky.
Let them prove they can change.
Olivia's voice softened. Your mother would have liked that answer. Ethan's throat tightened. Yes, he said. Then he ended the call and sat back in the quiet. For the first time since boarding, he let himself feel the pain. Not all of it, just enough to remind himself he was still human. And outside the window, the aircraft flew on, carrying one wounded man, one shaken crew, and a cabin full of witnesses toward a landing none of them would forget. Los Angeles appeared beneath them like a field of scattered gold. The city stretched wide under the night sky, highways glowing in long red and white lines, neighborhoods flickering in soft blocks of light, the Pacific sitting dark beyond everything, like a quiet witness. The cabin lights came up slowly. First class blinked awake, but no one returned to normal. Normal had been left behind in Chicago. Captain Grant's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our descent into Los Angeles. Please return your seats and tray tables to their upright position. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival. His voice was steady, but those who had listened closely all night could hear the change in it. Less performance, more weight. Rachel moved through the aisle for the final cabin check. She had done this hundreds of times in training and on flights, but tonight each gesture felt different. A seatbelt was not just a seatbelt. A tray table was not just a tray table. Service was not just procedure. Every action carried a question now. Do you see the person in front of you? She stopped beside Ethan. Mr. Brooks, seatbelt secure? He looked up and gave a small nod. Secure. She smiled faintly, then lowered her voice. I wrote everything down. Ethan held her gaze. Good. I am scared. That was honest.
Small human.
Ethan nodded. Courage does not remove fear, Rachel. It gives fear a job to do. Her eyes shone, but she did not cry this time.
What job?
To keep you careful, not silent. Rachel breathed in slowly. Then she nodded and moved on. Across the aisle, Richard Coleman adjusted his cufflinks with restless fingers. His coffee had gone cold an hour earlier. He had not slept. He had replayed the scene again and again, not as a witness anymore, but as a participant. His silence had not been neutral. His impatience had not been harmless. He had helped make the room colder for a man already standing in a storm. When Rachel passed, he stopped her. Miss Carter. Rachel turned. Yes, sir. Would you be willing to include my contact information in your statement? I saw enough to confirm Mr. Brooks remained calm. Rachel studied him.
Not suspicious.
Just careful.
You are sure?
Richard looked toward Ethan. I should have been sure sooner. Margaret Lewis heard him and gave a small nod, but no praise. She was old enough to know that men like Richard did not need applause for finally reaching the starting line. The aircraft dipped lower. A soft shudder passed through the fuselage. Vanessa sat in the forward jump seat, strapped in, hands folded so tightly her fingers had gone pale. She stared at the floor until the patterns in the carpet blurred. Every few seconds, she heard a phrase from the night return to her. What tone? Discomfort is not danger. My humanity should have been enough. She wanted to defend herself. Part of her still did. She wanted to say she had been tired. That first-class passengers could be difficult. That fraud really happened. That crew had to be alert. All of that was true in pieces. But none of it explained why she had ignored the boarding pass. None of it explained why she had seen proof and kept looking for guilt. The aircraft descended through thin clouds. City lights smeared across the window beside her. She saw her own reflection in the glass and almost looked away. Instead, she forced herself to keep looking. It was the first honest thing she had done all night. Captain Grant sat in the cockpit with his hands resting near the controls while the first officer handled the descent checklist. He had flown into Los Angeles countless times, but tonight the runway lights looked different, like a line drawn in front of him. Before tonight, he had thought of leadership as control, a firm voice, quick decisions, trust in the chain of command. Now he understood the danger in that. A chain could hold people together. It could also drag the wrong person down if nobody checked at where it was tied. The first officer glanced at him. "You okay, Captain?" Grant looked at the glowing instruments. "No." The first officer waited. Grant added, "But I am paying attention." That was all he could say. In seat 2A, Ethan closed his laptop and slid it into his bag. His body ached in the quiet places. His shoulders, his jaw, the space behind his eyes. He had stayed composed for hours, and composure had a cost people rarely saw. The world often praised dignity after pain, but Ethan knew dignity did not mean pain was absent. It meant pain had been carried without being allowed to destroy anyone else. His phone buzzed one more time. "Olivia," he answered. "We have confirmation," she said. "Aurora Bertrand, Denise Whitaker, will meet you at the arrival gate with legal counsel and the head of customer experience. Media is waiting outside security. They are asking whether you will make a statement." Ethan looked out at the city lights, not at the gate. Where then? "After I speak with the employees involved and the witnesses who choose to speak, I will not let the cameras become the first room where truth is discussed." Olivia paused. "That is wise." "It is decent," Ethan said. There was a difference. The landing gear lowered with a heavy mechanical groan. Several passengers stiffened. The sound pulled everyone back into their bodies, back into the aircraft, back toward consequence. Margaret reached into her purse and removed a small notepad. Her handwriting was uneven but clear. She wrote her name, her phone number, then one sentence. "I saw him treated like a suspect after he had already proven he was a passenger." She tore out the page and held it toward Ethan. He took it gently.
Thank you.
She smiled sadly. "Do not thank me for doing what should have been ordinary." Ethan folded the paper once and placed it in his jacket pocket. Sometimes ordinary goodness is what keeps the world from breaking. Margaret looked away, moved by the mercy in that answer. The runway rose beneath them. The wheels struck the ground. Hard. A jolt ran through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled. Someone gasped. The engines roared in reverse, loud and forceful, pressing everyone back into their seats. Then came the long roll. Slower, slower. Finally, the aircraft turned off the runway and taxied under rows of blue lights. No one clapped. No one joked. This landing was not an ending. It was the moment before doors opened. Captain Grant came over the intercom again. "Welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is just after 10 in the evening. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been turned off." He paused. Then he added, quietly but clearly, "And to every passenger aboard, thank you for your patience tonight." The word patience sounded insufficient, but perhaps that was all a public intercom could hold. At the gate, the plane stopped with a soft lurch. The jet bridge moved toward them, humming against the aircraft door. Through the window, Ethan could see people waiting inside the terminal, not a crowd, a line, with executives in dark suits. Airport operations staff, a woman with silver hair standing still, hands clasped in front of her, Denise Whitaker. Aurora Air's board chair. Her face was not angry. That would have been easier.
It was grave.
The seatbelt sign chimed off. No one stood right away. First class waited. For Ethan. He noticed, and it saddened him. Power had changed the order of the room again. Even now, even after everything. So he stayed seated. A few passengers began to rise carefully. Bags came down. Coats were gathered. Life resumed, but it moved slower now, as if everyone understood they were carrying testimony off that plane. Rachel stood by the forward door. Vanessa stood behind her, no longer greeting passengers, no longer smiling. Captain Grant came out of the cockpit and stopped beside Ethro. "Mr. Brooks." Ethan rose and pulled his bag from the overhead bin.
"Captain?"
Grant's face was drawn. "I will cooperate fully with the review." Ethan nodded. "I hope you do more than cooperate." Grant absorbed that. "I will learn from it." Ethan looked at him for a long second. "Make sure your crew does too." Then Ethan stepped into the aisle. Vanessa moved forward suddenly.
"Mr. Brooks."
Rachel stiffened. Grant turned. Ethan stopped. Vanessa's face had crumpled, but her voice stayed quiet. "I know another apology will not fix it, but I need to say this without protecting myself. I did not treat you like a passenger. I treated you like a suspicion. I am sorry." Ethan looked at her. Then he said, "Remember that sentence. Not for me. For the next person who does not have my protection." Vanessa nodded, crying silently. Ethan walked toward the door. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the air changed. Cooler, brighter, terminal air, real ground underfoot again. Denise Whitaker waited at the end of the corridor.
Mr. Brooks.
She said. Ethan stopped before her. "Ms. Whitaker." She looked past him toward the aircraft, then back into his eyes. "I am ashamed this happened on our airline." Ethan's voice was calm. "Then do not ask me to help hide it." Denise did not flinch. "I will not." Behind Ethan, passengers began emerging from the aircraft. Margaret, Richard, Rachel, Captain Grant, even Vanessa escorted quietly by operations staff, witnesses, not to a scandal, to a lesson. Ethan looked down the long glass corridor toward the terminal lights and the waiting world beyond security. Then he said, "Let us begin with the truth." The conference room at Los Angeles International Airport had no windows, and that made the silence feel heavier. It was tucked behind a restricted hallway near airline operations, far from the polished lounges and bright duty-free stores. The walls were beige. The carpet was gray. The table was too long for the room. A pot of coffee sat untouched beside a stack of paper cups. Ethan Brooks sat at one end, not at the head. He had chosen the side chair on purpose. Power had already done enough moving people around tonight. Denise Whitaker sat across from him, back straight, silver hair tucked neatly behind one ear. She was 62, a former federal prosecutor turned board chair, known for cutting through excuses with a voice that never rose. Beside her sat Aurora Air's general counsel, Michael Reeves, with a leather folder open in front of him. Captain Grant sat near the wall. Rachel sat 2 chairs away from him, hands folded in her lap. Vanessa sat at the far end, accompanied by a union representative named Carol Bennett. Mark Ellis sat beside operations, staring at the table as if the wood grain might offer mercy. Margaret Lewis had agreed to give a witness statement before leaving. So had Richard Coleman. Both had been escorted to a quiet waiting area outside with coffee and water. No cameras were in the room. That was Ethan's condition. Truth first. Performance later. Denise opened a folder. "Mr. Brooks, before anyone else speaks, I want to say this directly. What happened tonight was unacceptable." Ethan looked at her. "Unacceptable is a clean word, Ms. Whitaker." She nodded once. "Yes, it is." He did not smile. "Then use the less clean one." The room tightened. Michael Reeves shifted in his chair. Denise held Ethan's gaze, discriminatory. Vanessa closed her eyes. The word did not explode. It landed. Heavy, final, impossible to put back. Ethan leaned back. "Thank you." Denise turned to Captain Grant. "Captain, we will begin with the sequence of events."
No interpretation. Just what happened.
Grant cleared his throat. His voice sounded rougher than it had in the cabin. Passenger Ethan Brooks boarded Aurora Air Flight 487 in Chicago. His boarding pass scanned valid for first class, seat 2A. Senior flight attendant Vanessa Collins later questioned his eligibility for the seat, requested identification, and reported a concern to purser Mark Ellis. Mr. Ellis suggested reseating Mr. Brooks in the main cabin. I was called from the cockpit. I reviewed his documents and still asked him to step off the aircraft for verification. He stopped. His jaw worked once. That was wrong. Denise wrote nothing. She listened. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Grant looked at Ethan, then back at Denise. "Because I trusted my crew more than the facts in front of me." Rachel looked down. Vanessa's shoulders trembled. Denise turned to Vanessa. "Miss Collins." Vanessa opened her eyes. "Tell us what you saw when you approached seat 2A. Vanessa's mouth moved, but no sound came at first. Carol Bennett touched her arm. Vanessa pulled herself together. "I saw a passenger who did not look like the passengers I expected in that seat." The room went still. It was the first fully honest sentence she had spoken all night. Denise waited. Vanessa continued. "He was dressed casually. He was quiet. He did not have a visible luxury bag or watch. I assumed there might be an issue." Michael Reeves looked up sharply, but Denise lifted one finger, stopping him. "Let her finish." Vanessa wiped her cheek. "When he showed his boarding pass, I should have stopped. When he showed his identification, I should have apologized." But I felt embarrassed. I felt challenged, so I kept pushing. Ethan watched her without expression. Vanessa looked at him. I told myself I was protecting the cabin, but I was protecting my assumption. Rachel's breath caught. That sentence hurt because it was true enough to teach. Denise turned to Mark. Mr. Ellis. Mark straightened. I failed to intervene properly. I accepted Vanessa's version because she was senior and because I wanted the fastest resolution. I thought moving Mr. Brooks would calm the cabin. Ethan spoke. You thought removing me would calm the cabin. Mark looked down. Yes. Say it again. Mark swallowed. I thought removing you would calm the cabin. Ethan nodded slowly. That is how harm becomes procedure. No one interrupted him. He continued. One person makes an assumption. Another person calls it a concern. A supervisor calls it a resolution. A captain calls it safety. By the time the passenger is removed, everyone has touched the injustice, but no one thinks they own it. Rachel wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Denise looked at her. Miss Carter, you asked to give a statement. Rachel sat straighter. Yes, Mom. Take your time. Rachel breathed in, then spoke. I saw Mr. Brooks' board. His ticket scanned green. No alert, no system issue. I heard Miss Collins question him more than once. I saw his boarding pass and license. I knew he was not the problem. Her voice shook. I did not speak soon enough because I was afraid of Vanessa and Mark and the crew culture. I was afraid of being labeled difficult. She looked at Ethan. But fear does not excuse silence. It explains it. That is all. Ethan's face softened. Denise wrote that down. Fear does not excuse silence. It explains it. The sentence seemed to change the room. Outside the door, footsteps passed in the hallway. Somewhere far away, a boarding announcement echoed through the airport. Another flight. Another gate. Another cabin full of strangers trusting an airline to see them fairly. Denise closed her folder. Here is what will happen tonight. Ms. Collins and Mr. Ellis will be removed from duty pending investigation. Captain Grant will be placed under administrative review. Rachel Carter will be protected from retaliation under witness policy. An outside firm will conduct a review of passenger treatment complaints over the past 5 years. Michael Reeves leaned in. Denise, we should discuss wording before we commit to scope. Denise turned to him. We are not wording our way out of this. Michael stopped. She faced Ethan again. Mr. Brooks, Aurora Air still wants the Nexatech partnership, but I understand if that is no longer possible. Ethan did not answer quickly. He looked around the room. At Vanessa, who had lost the shield of denial. At Mark, who had learned how cowardice could sound professional. At Grant, who had discovered that command without humility could become harm. At Rachel, who had found her voice in time to keep it. Then he looked back at Denise. I do not want revenge, he said. Vanessa broke down then, quietly, completely. Ethan did not stop. Revenge is easy. It burns fast. It makes people feel clean without making them better. I want change that lasts after the headlines move on. Denise nodded slowly.
What does that look like?
Ethan leaned forward. Real training, not a video employees click through while eating lunch. Scenario-based training, bias recognition, de-escalation, passenger rights, documentation standards, clear rules for when verification is appropriate and when it becomes harassment. He turned to Michael. And data, not feelings. Show me who gets questioned, who gets moved, who gets removed, who gets called aggressive. Track it, audit it, publish the findings internally. Michael looked uncomfortable. Ethan's voice sharpened. If the numbers are clean, you have nothing to fear. If they are not, you have something to fix. Denise said, agreed. Ethan looked at Vanessa. And every apology must name the harm. No misunderstanding, no inconvenience, no service lapse. Vanessa nodded through tears.
Yes.
Ethan's voice lowered. Because when you misname harm, you make the injured person carry it twice. The room went quiet again. This time, not from fear, from recognition. Denise stood. Then we begin now. She opened the conference room door. Margaret Lewis and Richard Coleman looked up from the waiting area. Their witness forms rested on the table between them. Margaret's hands were folded. Richard's face looked older than it had on the plane. Reporters waited beyond the glass security doors, held back by airport police and corporate staff. Camera lights flashed against the corridor. Phones rose. Questions shouted through the distance. Ethan stepped out first. Denise did not stop him. Vanessa watched from inside the room as the man she had doubted walked toward the waiting noise, with no entourage, no raised fist, no hunger for spectacle, just dignity. At the security line, Ethan paused and turned back to the group. His eyes moved from Rachel to Captain Grant to Vanessa. "What happened tonight started before me," he said. "Make sure it ends after me." Then he walked toward the cameras, not to protect his name, but to force a company to protect the next person whose name nobody knew. The cameras exploded the moment Ethan Brooks stepped into the terminal corridor. White lights slammed across the polished floor. Reporters pushed against the security barrier. Microphones lifted into the air like weapons searching for a target. Voices crashed over each other. "Mr. Brooks, did Aurora Air discriminate against you? Will Nexa Tech cancel the partnership? Do you plan legal action?" Ethan stopped beneath the cold airport lights. Not dramatic, not angry, just still. And somehow that silence controlled the hallway more than shouting ever could. Airport officers held the line while passengers from Flight 487 slowly filtered into the terminal behind him. Some kept walking. Some stopped to watch. Some lowered their eyes in shame because they had seen the entire thing happen and done nothing until the room became safe enough to speak. Rachel stood near the doorway beside Margaret Lewis. Captain Grant remained several feet behind them, rigid in his uniform. Vanessa stayed furthest back, hands trembling, unable to lift her eyes toward the cameras. Denise Whitaker approached Ethan quietly. "You do not owe the media anything tonight," she said. Ethan looked at the reporters, then at the phones already streaming live across the country. "Yes, I do." Denise understood immediately.
Not for the company.
For the people watching. Ethan stepped toward the microphones. The hallway fell silent in pieces until only the hum of airport ventilation remained. He spoke calmly. "Tonight was not about one seat on one airplane." A reporter leaned forward.
Then what was it about?
Ethan's eyes moved slowly across the crowd. It was about how quickly dignity disappears. When people decide you do not look like you belong, the silence deepened. No performance, no slogans. Just truth spoken plainly enough that nobody could hide behind confusion. Ethan continued. "I had a valid ticket, a valid seat assignment, valid identification. I stayed calm. I cooperated fully. None of that protected me from suspicion once assumptions entered the room." Cameras flashed. A woman from a national news network asked, "Do you believe race played a role?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Yes." Not because someone used a slur, not because someone shouted hatred. Most discrimination today does not arrive that honestly. It arrives dressed as procedure, concern, policy, safety, professionalism. Behind him, Captain Grant lowered his head. Vanessa's shoulders shook harder. Ethan did not look back at them. He kept speaking to the people beyond the cameras. The danger is not only in cruel people, it is in ordinary people who stop questioning themselves once they feel authority on their side. A reporter asked, "What happens now with Aurora Air?" Denise stepped slightly forward, but Ethan lifted one hand gently, not to silence her, to answer himself. "That depends on what they do next." He paused. Anybody can apologize when cameras are watching. Character is revealed by what changes after attention fades. Several reporters scribbled furiously. A younger journalist near the back called out, "Mr. Brooks, why stay on the flight after everything happened?" Ethan's expression shifted then. Not harder, sadder, because leaving quietly would have made the humiliation look private, and it was never private. Every passenger in that cabin learned something tonight.
So did the crew. So did I.
Margaret felt tears rise again. Rachel stood straighter. Even Richard Coleman, watching from behind the security line with his coat draped over one arm, felt the words land in the center of his chest. Ethan continued. "People think power means making others fear you. Real power is staying human when humiliation tries to strip that away." The hallway remained perfectly still. No one interrupted him now. No one rushed him. Because truth spoken without rage frightened people more than anger ever could. One final question came from the crowd. What would you say to the next person who experiences something like this? Ethan breathed in slowly. Do not let someone else's prejudice become your reflection. Their failure to see your worth does not reduce it. He looked toward Rachel, and if you witness it happening to someone else, speak sooner than comfort tells you to. Rachel covered her mouth. Captain Grant closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa finally looked up. For the first time all night, she stopped protecting herself long enough to hear the full damage clearly. Denise stepped beside Ethan after the final question. Aurora Air will conduct a full independent review into tonight's incident and previous passenger complaints. We are committed to accountability and reform. A reporter asked if employees would be terminated. Denise answered carefully, accountability is not a press release. It is a process. But this company will not minimize what occurred tonight. Ethan nodded once beside her. That mattered, not perfection, truth. Security began guiding reporters backward as airport traffic built behind them. Flights were arriving. Families reunited near baggage claim. Children ran through the terminal, dragging tiny backpacks. The world kept moving, unaware that one small corner of the airport had become a mirror for something much larger. Margaret touched Ethan's arm gently before leaving. Your mother raised you well. Ethan smiled faintly. She raised me tired. That's different. Margaret laughed softly through her tears. Then she squeezed his hand and disappeared into the crowd. Richard approached next. He looked uncomfortable in his own skin.
Mr.
Brooks, he said, I spent most of my life believing decent intentions were enough. Tonight proved otherwise. Ethan studied him. What matters is what you do after learning that. Richard nodded slowly. I think I finally understand. He offered his hand. This time Ethan took it. Not because Richard had earned instant redemption, but because people changed one honest moment at a time and refusing every bridge guaranteed nobody crossed. Rachel walked over last, out of uniform now. Coat folded over one arm, eyes exhausted. I submitted my statement, she said. Good. She hesitated. I almost stayed quiet. Ethan looked at her carefully. Almost matters less than eventually. Rachel smiled through tears. I used to think professionalism meant never making anyone uncomfortable. Tonight I realized silence protects the wrong people. Ethan nodded. The right thing often enters a room quietly. That does not make it weak. Rachel hugged him before she could overthink it. He hugged her back. Simple. Human. Nearby, Vanessa watched the moment from across the terminal. No one stood beside her. No cameras pointed her way anymore. And somehow that loneliness hurt more. Captain Grant approached her slowly. Operations arranged. Transportation to the hotel, he said. Vanessa stared toward the floor. Do you think they will fire me? Grant answered honestly. I do not know. She wiped her face. I keep replaying it. The moment I looked at him and decided he did not belong there. Grant's voice stayed low. That is the moment you need to remember. Not to punish yourself forever. To make sure you never do it again. Vanessa nodded weakly. For the first time in years, she understood that professionalism without humanity was just polished cruelty. Outside the terminal, black SUVs waited beneath bright white lights. Drivers stood beside open doors while aircraft roared somewhere overhead in the warm California night. Olivia stepped out from one of the vehicles holding Ethan's coat. Long night, she said softly. Ethan looked back through the terminal glass one final time. At Rachel, at Margaret disappearing into the crowd, at Captain Grant standing beside a shattered crew, at Vanessa sitting alone with the truth. Then he looked up toward the sky where Flight 487 had crossed hours earlier. Not just a flight anymore, a lesson, a warning, a chance. He slipped on his coat and walked toward the waiting car as reporters continued shouting questions into the night air behind him. And somewhere across America, millions of people watched the story unfold on glowing screens, recognizing pieces of their own lives inside it. Some remembered moments they stayed silent. Some remembered rooms where they were judged before they spoke. Some remembered pain they had buried just to survive another day. But maybe now, because one man refused to surrender his dignity quietly, someone else would find the courage to speak sooner. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave 3 words in the comments that carry the message forward. Justice must win.